Hey guys, this is the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. I challenge Aubrey Sitterson, Matt Black, and Jeff Schiller. You guys have 24 hours. For more information, go to alsa.org. Hey guys, welcome to the Roundtable. I'm Amir.
I'm Brian.
I'm Jason.
I'm Allison.
And this time we're talking about a possible one console future and what that might be like. And we actually started this conversation off camera a week ago.
That's usually what we do.
Off camera,
Yeah.
a week ago.
Yep.
And it was because we had seen then the news that Xbox One was being outsold
They did?
by...
Oh, sorry.
No. Xbox One was being outsold by PS4 3-1.
Quite the opposite, then.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And now, since we've had that off-camera discussion,
Right.
we're also seeing Sony doesn't even understand why they sold 10 million units so far, and that makes them nervous somehow.
We're too successful. Oh, no.
But yeah, and looking at that, and also looking at Wii U, we already know what that performance looks like. And of course, people are talking about what a one-console future might look like, and I figured we should all maybe give our take on that.
Well, yeah, and it really came from this idea. When we heard 3-1, that's a big number. And, and one of the things that surprised Sony is how the rate at which PS4s are selling has not slowed down a whole lot. It's still pretty...
Somebody knocking on my door.
Knocking.
Rapping on my chamber door. Okay, should we start over?
Sony knows more about ALS and why they're selling 10 million consoles, apparently. No, that's not true.
No.
But they don't know. They don't know why. It's that successful. A lot of people didn't think that consoles would be successful, especially after the Wii U's failure. So that's what, but just the gap in sales, we started thinking, well, there's this idea that what if it just got bigger? What if the gap got bigger and bigger to the point where the only console that new games were being made for on a large scale was, like a PlayStation 4, maybe not this generation, but next generation. And what would that look like, and what would that mean for the games industry? So,
bleak. I don't think that would be good at all. And that was kind of what sparked our discussion, was that I felt like Xbox One being outsold by PlayStation 4 3-1 is not a good thing, because it creates a more difficult position for Microsoft.
Yeah.
Specifically in exclusive, we talked about like how exclusives work, where you have to cover that lost fan base for like Rise of the Tomb Raider.
Yep.
Let's say, for example, they wanted exclusivity on Rise of the Tomb Raider permanently, which we now know is a timed exclusive.
Right.
If they wanted it to permanently be exclusive on Xbox, it would literally cost 3 times more for Microsoft to pay Square Enix than Sony to approach them and pay only a third of the price, saying, hey, well, that's only a third of the audience that you would lose to get exclusivity. I don't think that it's good, because it continues to make that slant, because now Sony will have more discounted options for exclusive offers, and will be able to attract more developers than Microsoft will, because they have the smaller audience. We already know what's going on with Nintendo and third-party support.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually a bad thing. As much as I love my PlayStation 4 and my PlayStation 3 and my Vita, I love all of my PlayStation devices.
At least you love the Vita, right?
Oh.
Well, somewhat. But yeah, I don't think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually kind of scary, because if we have a one-console future, there's still going to be that competition with PC, right? But it's not much of a... they're completely different markets.
Yeah.
So it's not really competition. And without competition, you don't have this what's the spirit of excellence, the want to be the best, the want to be number one, and to keep innovating. And I think that's what, honestly, I think that's what Sony does best, is innovate and bring new things to the market.
Okay, all right. Like with the Move.
Well, I mean, there are examples of copying others, but
yeah, I see what you're saying, and that's what any of the manufacturers want to have, is that key product that brings people in, right? And if you're the differentiator, right?
Yep.
You got to, even if you're not the fastest or the most powerful, you have to have something that hooks people, right? And Nintendo did that with the Wii. They had a hook that got people really excited, even though they didn't have the best and most powerful system. But the counterpoint to the bleak future you paint is that imagine if you had a copy of Mario and you just had a system that you played it in, which was the same system that you played Last of Us in, and the same system that you played Halo in, or downloaded to, as would be perhaps more likely, and you just had a single box for that instead of I finally broke down and I ordered a PS4. It's on the way. But I'm thinking, I've got my 360 and I have the PS3 and Wii U. Really, we're delving into really first world problems here. See Weird Al if you have any questions on what those are. I'm like, where am I going to put this? Where am I going to put it on my entertainment center? Where am I going to, I got to get another
okay, I see what you mean by first world problems.
And I've got to go, and I'm just like, because I have different, if I want to play Mario, I got to put it here. If I want to play Halo, I want to put it here. If I want to play, Uncharted, I got to put it here. But if I want to play Uncharted 4, I got to put it here on this fourth box. Whereas if we just have one console, I don't have to worry about any of that. I just have one device, and I think that's part of the appeal of PC, is that, with all of its shortcomings and driver updates and all that kind of stuff, and all of the fun things that you found in your adventures with PC gaming, you have a system that'll play pretty much anything, whether it's a text-based adventure or the latest, Ubisoft shooter or Call of Duty or whatever. You have that box that's going to do all of that.
Well, except for Uncharted 4.
Except for those exclusives. Right. But if we had those exclusives on a single box, would that be a bad thing?
Yeah.
So if you just had one box and made that.
Let's paint the picture here.
All right.
The picture is that PlayStation wasn't even supposed to exist technically. Sony wasn't even supposed to be really in the games industry on its own. It was They were developing for Nintendo to create an add-on for the If Nintendo didn't decide to stick with cartridge for Nintendo 64, and then move on to GameCube because they were concerned with piracy, the PlayStation would have never happened, and I'm sure they regret that today. But we went from PlayStation 1 versus Nintendo 64, and that was a pretty awesome era in its own right. But then you had the PlayStation 2, which innovated again, backwards compatibility. They did a lot of things with the PlayStation 2. Yep. It had an insane install base.
And then also started where you can have it to where you can play movies too, which also sold even more.
Exactly. Exactly. And then going from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3, graphical fidelity 20 times higher. 20 times more power is what they were touting it as, and now the PlayStation 4. The thing is that progression happens because the technology needs to move forward, and the technology needs to move forward because they need to compete with everybody else who's at the forefront of technology. Yep. If that competition dies, to me, I see it as the games industry dying because this has happened before, and it was what we call the Dark Ages, right? If I know people say that graphics aren't important, and that it's just coming down to gameplay. But the fact of the matter is that graphics are very, very important. If you're not getting that eye candy, a fun game is a fun game. But it's just another fun game to play. Eventually, you'll be doing something else with your time to find more fun. And I think flagship games like Uncharted 4, like all of these exclusives that are showing what these systems can do is what's pushing these sales. What would an E3 be if they only showed games with the graphical fidelity of Shovel Knight?
Stale.
Well, okay. Games like I think that we need to separate like more realistic from high fidelity, because you can have a lot of particle effects and your game can be very pretty and beautiful. Have nothing to do with the hyper realism of a remastered.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about hyper realism. I'm talking about the capability of the hardware.
The examples that you're giving is kind of pushes in that direction.
Right, and that's the problem that that's the mistake that I'm making, is that I'm talking about the software, but that software needs capable hardware to run.
Right.
And if there's only one person manufacturing the hardware with no competition, what is the purpose of constantly creating top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art hardware when you can do what Nintendo's done now and just say, well, we'll just use existing older technology and just, here, developers, do what you can with this.
Well, you do run into some difficulty, obviously, but if you want people to continue buying your hardware, you have to come up with ways of getting them into it, which is why we have, if we're going to use the Nintendo example, why we have Mario Kart, why we have the Smash Brothers, why we have Hyrule Warriors. I mean, these are not new IPs, but that's not really the argument. It's just like, why are people going to buy a single platform? And, I think that we have to take into account that the future is a streaming future. So there may not even be a box, which is one of the puzzling parts of, what's puzzling Sony is just like, well, we're putting into place these components. So if you only need a TV to stream a game, you don't have any hardware to worry about. So what is that interconnect? Who is that vendor? Do we want 3 separate services that you pay for?
No, absolutely not. But we do.
Well, right. Well, but that's so. If we had one combined service, that would be okay. But one combined box, not okay.
No, because now we're going into something else. You're talking about streaming, and we're not talking about the console.
Well, we're talking about how do
anymore.
you get these games? Like, how do you get to the content? And that's what the hardware is vehicles for. That's what the console's a vehicle for, right?
Right.
It's how do you?
But the draw in itself of buying the console is buying the power that the console yields. And for developers, the enticement, like, don't forget that the people that are making the games, it's their job and they get paid for it, but those are the most passionate gamers in the world.
Right.
They're the ones that love it enough to sit there and make it and mold it and make it their own.
Yeah.
And then try to sell that creativity to everybody else. Now, if the hardware isn't moving at the same fast pace and all of these new capabilities are not coming in, that creativity is stumped. There's just so far they can go. Like, I still remember, it's nothing new, but this is the one that comes to mind, is the guy from Drive Club and how we were making fun of how ridiculous he was, that he cared so much about, like, how the light reflects off of a headlight to show which direction you waxed. I was like, what? Like, why does anybody even care? But he spoke about that game was something that he had conceptually for 9 years. And then technology caught up to the point where he was like, okay, well, now I can finally do it, and let's go and do it. Yeah. That's the creativity that a developer has. Or Dead Space was drawn up on napkins before they finally, said, hey, we want to not make T for Team games, and we want to make this game, and here's a demo. We kind of worked on it, and bam, it came out. If there isn't state-of-the-art hardware, there's nothing to excite developers and make them start dreaming of doing something bigger. And if they're not dreaming of doing something bigger, they're making more of the same. And if they're making more of the same, which has happened before in the 80s, we're getting, people are just going to lose interest. There's got to be something new. And there's got to be something that looks better than the last.
Well, but you bring up the 80s. We had a lot of competition in the 80s, and there was a big bust as a result of that.
Yeah, but you can't really say a lot of those were competition against Atari. And it was really Atari that was honestly just becoming very greedy and money hungry. because they released a second console that was really more of the same.
Exactly.
And then that floods the market and then crushes it. Kind of like, almost like if you notice like games like any of the music-based games, like all the rock bands and all these. The rock bands were actually pretty innovative because of Harmonix. But then, Activision and them going, well, here's Band Hero, here's Guitar Hero 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all in 1 year. They flooded the market and people didn't want it anymore.
Right. Saturating the market.
Right.
But that's the thing. Gaming took off, and that's the dark age I'm talking about, where it was just Atari. The moment Nintendo shut up, and then had the competition from Sega, gaming boomed again.
Well, but they didn't have a whole lot of competition from Sega to begin with. I mean, it's not really until you get the Genesis that you had a real competitor to Nintendo. Nintendo had the market pretty well locked up when they came on the scene, especially in North America, and they had very stringent guidelines on how you would publish a game.
Oh yeah.
So you had to dance to Nintendo's tune, and it was a result. I mean, basically Nintendo saved the games industry, as it were, by coming in and locking things down where they were very open.
Yeah.
And the whole licensed by Nintendo thing, right? Because you had one of the problems with Atari was that anybody could make a Atari compatible system, right? So you had in television and Commodore 64, you had all these systems, and a lot of them could play cartridges across each other. Talk about backwards compatibility. Atari had that with their systems; it could play. And there weren't a whole lot of leaps forward, and I grant you that. But when Nintendo came out, it had that leap forward, but it really consolidated and gave us that single kind of unified structure, and they were very successful with it. But because of those restrictive policies, we did end up having more people who didn't want to play that game, no pun intended, and that they funneled into like Sega. And tried to unify Atari, and the same sort of forces is what why we have PlayStation, and what sort of motivated Sony to get into that. So, I mean, but that's the thing though, is that you can have a unification that promotes growth because it's a response to how spread out the industry can be. Because you talk about exclusives. We have these titles, like if Tomb Raider wasn't a timed exclusive, if it was buttoned up solely for Xbox One, right? And we started seeing more of that segregation across the systems. Then,
which we had before.
Yeah.
The PlayStation 2 era was like that.
Right. And we don't want that either, right? We want to have that. We want to have more freedom to choose. We don't want these walled gardens.
True, but like you said with the lockdown by Nintendo, if you said that in today's day and age, and you said a manufacturer was locking down something, restricting your freedom, back then we didn't have the internet.
Right.
So you didn't hear everybody scramble and go crazy, and the only magazine they really had was Nintendo Power. So it's not like they really, were all that informed. But if you say that in today's day and age, it'll be an uproar. Gamers will go crazy. And Xbox One reveal showed that. It was just like, oh, you can't share games? Oh, rabble.
Right.
So that same...
But it killed all that innovation that came out of that. Like, we don't have the game sharing that they talked about. We don't have the...
and that's the reason I believe that they're failing. Because, maybe they had a little bit of a boost in sales for the hardcore Xbox fan. But the truth is that they never really stuck by
anything
those differences.
Right.
And so now they're just PlayStation 4.5. Or more like, 3.5, because we're also getting these...
Wow.
these other power issues that the Kinect originally had taken away. So,
well, it doesn't have as much raw horsepower because they're using slower memory anyway. Anyway, I'm not going to get into.
The thing is that let's say, and I don't think this is very far fetched. Let's say that right now we're seeing the doppelganger of the late '80s, which it was Nintendo and Sega. Which seems about right. Sega Master System didn't sell as well as Nintendo Entertainment System.
Right.
That's still competition.
Yeah.
Sony can't just lay back and be like, oh, we won.
Oh yeah, no.
I mean, and even at the end of this life cycle, even if it's still 3-1 or 5-1, Sony still can't lay back and say, okay, we're cool, because Microsoft will bounce back with something else next time. Because we also said, even though the Xbox One is not performing anywhere, near what the PS4 is performing, it's doing better than the Xbox 360.
Right. Yeah.
So, and this is the thing, console wars are really a gamer thing.
Yeah.
We talk about the console wars. We go into the comments and troll people. And
Some of us do.
Some of us do.
Some of us do.
Well, don't look at me. I don't troll. I'm
Never
there,
know.
I'm there to control the shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, all of this stuff happens on the gamer level. On the company level, they only care that they are more successful than last time.
Yeah.
And that they're profiting, and that they
money.
can go and do it again, and they can make money and do better for their company.
Yeah.
So Microsoft is still doing very well,
Yeah.
regardless of what the numbers say, and there's still competition. But now take Xbox and just take it away. Mm-hmm. Take everybody away and just leave Sony. What is the incentive for them to make another system that's state of the art, that gives even more horsepower? For what reason?
Mm-hmm. Well, really, I guess competition is probably the only reason why we have a new system.
Because that's what I was thinking the whole time. Is like that's the scary part, is you don't want it to be just one console, because then it'd be like, internet and cable companies that have control over. Then they can just charge you whatever, do whatever you want. Like, oh, we don't, even though that area has higher speed, we don't care to upgrade it because you're still going to give us money anyways.
Yeah, and then it becomes more about like, oh, we're losing interest in this, we're losing interest. It becomes more of the third-party developer going to Sony and saying, hey, we're selling a lot less games now because such and such is going on. You need to make an adjustment. So then it becomes an era of adjustments and not an era of let's go out there and impress. And that's what I was saying. If E3 every year looked like Uncharted 4 looks great right now.
Yeah.
But 10 years from now, if you see another thing with the graphical fidelity of an Uncharted 4, I'm done. I'm not interested.
Right.
I'll play for a couple of hours maybe.
Right. But then again, we had something of the graphical fidelity of Shovel Knight 20 years ago, and it was at E3, and then we saw it again at E3 20 years later. And yet that graphical style is able to capture gamers, whereas if you look at, the 3D titles, like you say, you look at like an Uncharted 1, even for some people today, it's very difficult to go back to, even though it at the time was considered a very pretty game. I still think it's a pretty game. Awesome. But I mean, that when you first come across that submarine and it's just fantastic. But the art direction, the art style is determined by the hardware. But when I say that if it weren't for this competition, we wouldn't have new systems, it's because we would still have games. They would just be streamed. We would have streaming games faster, and in that instance, we would probably see, and then we would have the games, better looking games, streamed to us sooner than we have them now. Because like at this point, we have PS3 games, and then if you look at Game Tap and OnLive and those sort of services that have morphed and died and all that kind of stuff. There would be more pressure for them from the infrastructure, right, to have better compression algorithms and to be able to crunch more of those graphics on their end, so that you have less. So your entry level is lower. Like, you have to have less equipment to play this game. All you have to have is a screen and maybe a controller, and that's all you need. And then instead of a device that you plug in, and so until
another streaming service comes along,
right?
And then they start to split the market again. So I mean,
so is it possible?
I see it being the same.
Is it possible that we could have one console future? Based on history, is it even possible?
Oh, yeah. It's definitely possible. And as far as the streaming service, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that that's where conventional video games are headed. The couch player. I think that we're going to get to a point where right now we talk about multiplayer as couch multiplayer and online multiplayer.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to get to the point where I feel that it's going to get to the point where it's going to be whether you're playing VR or you're streaming a game.
Mm-hmm.
I think VR will be the future of, if they play it right, because as a peripheral, I don't think it'll work. But if VR becomes a platform on its own, I think that's the future of console, and I think the future of what console is now becomes streaming. But the question really is without competition, can we succeed, even if it's streaming? I understand the benefits for the gamer side, and I definitely see how it's exciting in the beginning. It's like, oh, I don't have to buy a PlayStation 5. I just turn on my TV and I got a PlayStation 5 and it's streaming.
Yeah,
awesome. And it's the only console, so any game that comes out, anytime I see marketing, I can go and I can stream it, and that's cool, and that's awesome and exciting for right now. Let's say it's got no lag. It's dreamy.
Yeah.
For how long can you play games with the same graphical fidelity? Until what point do you get where you just get sick of it? And I'm sorry that I keep repeating myself, but that's really that's really where I see that line is. I see that once we pass that line, and you know what? They're saying from Sony, and I don't know if you guys agree with me on this, but Sony says they can't understand why they sold 10 million units.
Yeah.
And I briefly mentioned this to you, again, off camera. They say they can't understand it. I know that we're in our 30s and we've been gamers in the 80s. We felt that console life cycle that went, every 5 years. And then all of a sudden it got stretched to 8 years. And I don't know about you guys, but the Wii U was announced to come out, and I just wanted freaking new hardware. I was never starved like that before. I just wanted something new. Even though I was totally content and happy with my PS3 and my Xbox 360, I wanted something new, a new experience, something that really, pushed the envelope further. But at the 5-year, 6-year mark, I almost feel like I had a biological clock where it was like, like the gamer clock. Like once those years came, I started to say, I want more. And there wasn't anything more. And then when the Wii U was announced, and I was like, this is more of the same.
Yeah.
I didn't buy a Wii U.
Right.
I stopped. I actually went, I told you this, I went to Walmart and I stood in front of a Wii U and said, I have $350 in my pocket right now. I just need to look around and see what game I want. I just want it. I want something new.
Yeah.
And I looked, and the only thing that interested me, and very, very remotely, was Nintendo Land. Yeah. And I was like, I'm not buying a $350 console for Nintendo Land.
Right.
And I turned around and I walked away, and then I spent $1,000 building a gaming rig because I was that starved.
Yep.
We did that with Wind Waker HD. How many times did we look at it when we found it? 3 or 4 different times, and it was still just like,
I wanted one, and I even I got to the point where the new the Mario 3D World came out. I really, really wanted it, and I was like, even though the last new Super Mario Brothers Wii, I enjoyed it. It brought back that nostalgia factor.
Yep.
But I only could get to the world 3, and I just kind of got bored with it.
Yeah.
And I had that worry about that even though everyone was loving the new 3D World, I just had that worry. It was like, will it be the same?
Yeah.
And then just us trying to justify, we're going to be spending $350 plus however much for the game, and what if that and maybe 2 or 3 other games we get and we never touch it, kind of like how the Wii is right now, because we never touch it. It's not even hooked up anymore. We literally were like, there's not even space. I'd rather have our PS4 and 360 and the PS3 hooked up than the Wii being hooked up right now.
Yeah.
And I can't justify it.
I mean, I played the heck out of the Wii when I first got it for about a year or so, but then the games just kind of flatlined, and
but also,
I never finished Skyward Sword.
Yeah. Didn't sell well comparatively.
It's just
Oh yeah, you told me some crazy numbers.
Yeah,
today.
it's like 500,000, something like that. With that
when
crazy
I had
install base.
when I had to start revisiting old worlds, I'm like, why do I have to keep going back?
Also the
and then
controls. If it would actually had more actual controls instead of having to worry on the motion, that's my problem with Nintendo right now, is because it's everything since the Wii's been a gimmick. It's all about the gimmicks. This is what's going to... They think gimmicks sell it. Gimmicks don't sell it. PS3's problem with 3D's a truth to that.
Yeah.
3D didn't. Even like with movies, I didn't care about 3D movies. I saw literally a handful of movies in 3D. And I didn't care.
I think Sony made that message very loud and clear when they broke away from Nintendo and released the PlayStation 1, that the most important thing, the thing that's going to make you very successful in the games industry as a manufacturer of hardware is third-party support. And the only way you're going to get third-party support is with an install base. And, you know, and now, you know, and we're seeing with the Wii, the new message that I got from the Wii was that even if you have the install base, you still need to give the third parties the power to stand out of their competition in that third party market, so that they can make these great games that stand out, and not just give them this one format or this limited amount of graphical fidelity. We keep going back to that word, but that's what it is.
Oh God!
Well, the point with the Wii U, the only things it's got going for it right now is it's first party games. And yes, when Zelda was announced and Brawl or the new Smash Brothers was announced, that grew their numbers, especially the Zelda. But it's still not enough to become competitive with PS4 or Xbox One, because you don't have the support past that point. Kind of like how we are with the new systems as it is. We know the new games are coming. We know, and we can't wait for them. But there's still that lag of like, I want that game. I want this to come out. And then the older, kind of like how the PS3 and the 360 was when it was first announced and it first came out. Yeah, you bought one. You had a couple games that you played for a bit. But next year's when you got 20, 30 plus games, and you can play whatever the hell you want at any time. The Wii U still doesn't have that.
Yeah.
First of all, Sony's strategy with third-party developers was as much practical move as anything else, because they didn't have the first-party development teams at launch that Nintendo had at that point. And if you go to executives at Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft, and you told them, if you had, if you could sell all of your games first party, would you do it and make as much or more money? They'd be like, well, yeah, we get more of a cut off of the first party games and stuff like that. I mean, one of the reasons why indie is being pushed so much is because they're trying to cut. They put so much money into these AAA titles for these first party studios, they didn't make the return back. I mean, if you look at games like on the PlayStation 3, you look at Uncharted 3 and Infamous 2 and all of these exclusives like from 2012. Those combined did not sell as much as Gears of War did in the same time period. So, it's a practical decision for them as much as anything else.
Gears of War, a sequel, or the first Gears of War? Gears of War 3 sold better, you're saying?
Better than all of those exclusives combined.
Okay. Well, the install base differed too, but okay.
Well, I mean, you had, 20...
See, the thing about sequels, the thing about sequels is also that you got to remember that assets are being reused. So the cost to develop a sequel is not the same as developing the first entry.
Right.
The first entry is from the ground up. And then after that, you're building upon what you've had before.
That's not always the case. Even
not
on
always,
the same
but
platform.
that's typically the point of creating a AAA title, though, is that you're creating a new IP as a AAA title and putting all of your money into it in the hopes that you can turn it into a franchise and keep developing sequels using all of that investment that you did. Kind of like what Destiny is doing, for example, although that's much higher amounts of money. But
it doesn't necessarily mean you're using the same game engine or anything like that. So you may have to
if you're going to
your
a next
assets.
Generation, no, but typically, you would be in the same game engine.
So not necessarily. It depends on the direction of the title.
Right.
Right. What they want that sequel to be. The other thing is like I didn't buy the Wii for graphical fidelity. I bought it because I wanted a new gaming experience.
Right.
So I didn't really care about that. And this assumption that just because I did, that if I just have a screen, that all of a sudden the graphical fidelity is not going to keep increasing. If we have a gaming service, that doesn't preclude games looking better.
We're not saying that. What I'm saying is without competition, there's no reason to invest in improving the hardware.
Well, but you don't need to improve the hardware in front of attached to your TV for the graphical fidelity or anything else.
Well, there's hardware that streams it, though.
Yeah, but
Right.
that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the box that's connected to the TV.
Okay, I thought we were moving on to streaming because I was
Well,
talking
yeah, we
about.
can talk about but
I was talking about what is the incentive if you have a one console future, which we said will most probably be streaming services.
yeah,
What is the incentive now after 5 years
yeah.
to now give more horsepower to developers or a different structure that will let them do more?
Okay, so a couple of different forces. One is the infrastructure of the internet, first and foremost. The development of new technologies in computers in general, which is what actually powers these streaming services. And you talk about bleeding edge technology save for a couple key features, the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One are hardly bleeding edge when it comes to pure computational power, graphic fidelity. They can't do 4K when we do have graphics cards.
And that was a lesson learned
capable
from
of
last
that.
generation, right?
Yeah, so if you want to talk about that, is like as soon as the hardware is released, it's already out of date. So why not cut that out and put the money where it will be used towards actual bleeding edge technology, have a lower entry point. And if we're talking about, if we're switching to a one streaming service future, really your pressures for change come from what does your infrastructure look like? So how can you get that product to the consumers? How do you identify what the consumers want and will play? And then what do your developers want to push out? What does that vision look like, and how willing are you to support it? And I think we have established, though, that it's unlikely that will be sustainable for any long period of time. So if we did have one console, eventually it would break down because people would want to break out of that, right? Mm-hmm. And if we had one streaming service, there would be others that would pop up. Mm-hmm. So eventually we would have pressure from within that to do something a little bit different because of the strictures like we talked about with Nintendo, and we've seen that sort of break out. But that unification can have benefits, and I guess that's my point. Because we saw that with Nintendo, we saw that to some extent with the CD format when PlayStation came out, and with the PlayStation 2 and DVD, and we're very likely to see that again if we keep seeing more and more segregation. Somebody's going to come along and say, well, look, this is going to be open to all of these can play in this one big walled garden. If you had a phone to switch technologies here that could access the Google Play Store and the iPhone, App Store and the Windows Store, why would you buy, an Android phone or an iPhone if you could get access to all of those on one device? Which one would you buy?
Yeah, and that's not the question here. I mean, we know that if you can have one console that plays everything, you'll want one console that plays everything. Yeah. And if it could be online and streaming and it's just one service, you would definitely subscribe and you would definitely pay and you would definitely love it.
Yeah.
For how long?
Yeah. Well, as long as they're making money, as long as they're keeping the service. That's it.
Right.
So if you don't buy it, then they'll have to change tactics.
What is your... Let's try it this way. I could say that I was far more excited in the leap from PS2 to PS3 and PS1 to PS2 than I was from PS3 to PS4.
Sure.
PS4 is awesome. I'm happy that there's something new. The controller feels great. Yeah. I know that we're still at the first year, and it's typical of the first year, but I just see, higher res textures. Mm-hmm. I don't see really anything crazy, new, or awesome going on just yet. Network-wise, there are some innovations being made.
Yeah.
And that's cool. Some new features for network, video sharing, whatever, all that good stuff. That's cool. But as far as the games themselves, at their core, I'm not so amazed as I was like when I made those leaps before. Right. And we touched on this very briefly. I lost my train of thought. I'll catch the next one. Sorry.
Catch the train.
Well, I think a lot of it's because there's no real innovation anymore.
A lot of them are just HD remakes.
I'm
we've
sorry.
seen so far.
That's what I was going to say. That what we touched on is that what Sony was doing was PlayStation 2 was like the state-of-the-art console. It was sold at a loss.
Yeah.
PS3 was sold at, because PS2 worked so well, they were like, oh, well, we'll do this again and we'll do it even bigger. This time we'll lose almost $300 on each unit, and we'll give them something that's state-of-the-art.
Yeah.
Which didn't work out so well because it was still very expensive. But now we have the PS4, which learned, because the PS3 struggled so bad, and the Xbox 360 really, inside the box, wasn't up to snuff compared to PS3. But the PS3 was so exotic and difficult to code for, it didn't make a difference.
Yep.
So now you have the PS4 following that 360 mentality of let's use current technology. And like you said, at this generation, consoles came out, they were already outdated.
Yep.
That was not the trend previously, though.
Well.
Yeah.
Well.
The PS3 was way ahead of its time as far as the infrastructure goes. No?
What
With
you
the
mean?
Blu-ray, I suppose.
The architecture
Internally,
of the,
yeah.
Of the oh, you mean the PS3?
Yeah.
Oh, the PS3. Yeah, the cell processor. The cell processor was a pretty impressive piece of technology. I mean, the servers is equivalent to like server processors, but as far as like what you would have in your home computer, the processor itself, and yet it can't load menus faster than an old Pentium machine. So it wasn't.
Handicapped by RAM, maybe.
It was, yeah. It definitely was. And its GPU definitely wasn't, overly impressive for the day. The raw computational power of that process was great, which is why it was wonderful for folding at home. For folding all of those proteins and finding cancer research and woohoo. But it wasn't really that fantastic for anything else at launch. Sony really had to work on that platform and work and get hacked and give away games and work. And then they finally, after 8 years, surpassed the Xbox 360 in install base. So worldwide. So that's exciting. That's great. But I was just thinking when you talk about better graphical fidelity and how that translates.
Can we go back to that whole they worked and worked and worked?
Yeah.
And finally got that higher install base?
Yeah.
I think that's a great example of where I'm standing here. They worked and worked and worked and worked, but if they were the only ones, why would they work?
Because they weren't making any money.
Because somebody else was getting it.
Yeah.
Somebody else was playing tug of war with the market and taking that money.
Well, the console war is just us. You said that. That's
right.
us. They're interested in making a profit.
But there's still an industry there with a limited amount of people in it that are buying. There's a limited amount of consumers, and when somebody else comes in and does better than you, that is your competition. You don't sit on the wayside and say, well, we're doing better than last time, so we're just going to sit down and let them keep doing better. You're going to continue to compete. You're going to try to do better than them, because at the end of the day, that's the statistic you want, is to say, I'm number one. So long as you're successful, that's good. But if you're the only one there, you used to be a wrestling fan. We'll use another wrestling analogy again. WWE right now fucking sucks compared to what it was at the end of the 90s in the Monday Night Wars. And all it took was one organization to say, we're gonna start taking their guys, and we're gonna go on TV at the exact same time, and we're gonna make a ratings war. And they went to war, and both companies were better for it. People were switching channels all the time. They had it wasn't a console war, but it was like a wrestling organization war, like who was better.
Sure.
Everybody was constantly fighting for ratings. Yeah. That goes on in the games industry and every industry all the time.
Yeah.
If you now only have one, which is what the WWE became, if you just have one, you're stagnant.
Yeah.
They right now, for example, the WWE has, a seventh of what the entire wrestling viewer base was. A seventh. So I just don't see if maybe I'm a dick, but actually I probably am a dick. I am a dick. But if I had a company and I was manufacturing one piece of hardware, and I was the only one, I beat out everybody else, at that point I would just keep doing the same thing because I know it works. I would just keep everything the way it is until something comes up that makes me change.
Right.
And that is why I was saying I don't think a one-console future, however that service is delivered, I don't think that works. If there is no competition, it might be cool and it might be convenient for us at first. But if things are not advancing and things are not moving and there's no incentive to make somebody move forward, and I am playing these games and I feel that they're not moving forward, I'm going to get bored. I'm going to stop playing. Games industry entirely suffers because it's dependent on one entity. And I don't, and of course, the further you get with that one entity not doing well and nobody coming in to compete, the less chances you have of somebody coming in to compete, because then they look at the numbers and they say, well, this is a failing business model. We shouldn't get into that industry.
Right. Well, okay, again, there's this assumption that if it is one or if it is a single service, that you can't have any improvement because there's no competition from other companies that sell the same product, when there are other market forces at play that dictate or that help you determine what products you're going to attempt to sell. And if they're not selling, again, if they're not buying, then they're going to get out of that industry themselves. One of the things that we're seeing is that there are a lot of niche markets for video games. Like we're seeing this diversity in the games themselves. And I think, again, we've all agreed that it is not a sustainable future, one console, one service.
Yeah.
But I'm just, saying that there are some, I agree, short-term potentially benefits to it that we've seen previously. And again, it's not all about graphical fidelity. I mean, look at...
No, definitely not.
I mean...
Well,
but for longevity, I think that is the key component. Gameplay...
Well, look at the 3DS.
What about it?
Is it better graphically than the PSP?
No, it's not.
Did it sell better than the PSP?
But it's more portable. But it's more
DS?
portable than a PSP or a Vita, which I think is really what the problem is on the Sony side. But that's for a different topic.
Well, it's also easier access.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, okay, with the PS Vita, you got to download your games. You got to be able to take care of that. Well, with a 3DS, you can take multiple games, change your cartridge wherever you need it, and it's a lot more. And to me, it's a lot more accessible than a PS Vita.
It also doesn't have to be upgraded either with those cards, those uniform cards.
Which I know, because if you download everything into the hard drive, you can just switch on the go.
Yeah.
But to me, if I look at a 3DS, there's just more appeal to it.
Yeah.
For better games, and you can still download to the hard drive on it on its own Nintendo store, but when I ever compare the two, I'd just rather have a Nintendo, a 3DS or a 2DS, because it just screams so much better to me. Because even the PSP,
the games are better too.
There was a couple. There was only
library's
a
just
handful of games
incredible.
I gave a shit about. Like, honestly, the only game I gave a shit about on the PSP was the remake of Final Fantasy Tactics, because that's one of my favorite games of all time.
Yeah.
PS Vita comes out, there's nothing I care about on that game. It doesn't matter what they come out with.
Yeah.
Even if it's a remake of games on PS3, PS4.
Yeah.
I just realized it's the same game. On a 3DS, to me, it seems a little bit different than it would be if you're playing on a home console. And that's my problem, is like Pokemon is a completely different game.
Yeah.
And also, like these throwbacks, so it's like Shovel Knight. Completely different game, and it also, to me, brings back that nostalgia factor. PS Vita, it's it's literally the same game. I could play it at home. And to me, nowadays, I just don't. It's really hard for me to get in a game anymore.
Yeah. So the limitation of the hardware forced developers to come up with different gameplay and take different routes with it, because they couldn't make the prettiest game, so they had to take other routes, which is thereby made it more appealing. Is that what you're saying?
In a way, yeah.
I think for me, like, now that we're getting into the handheld market.
Because, well, and the other thing is that you can put cartridges in the Vita. Like, there's no difference there.
I think the thing is that Nintendo's handheld plays to Nintendo's strengths, which is that they're not about graphical fidelity. They have a philosophy about developing games. And even their third parties that develop for them, sometimes they'll get in on it and be like, no, we would like if you did it this way, because this is our philosophy about game development. Like, like they were talking about with Bayonetta 2.
Yeah.
They were like, coaching, and Hyrule Warriors also, they're very much into, they have their hands in that. They have a development philosophy that Sony with handhelds does not have. They don't have their hands in it. They don't have a way of, developing games. They have studios that develop games for them.
Yeah.
The Vita presents itself as a hardcore machine that's capable, that is more powerful and capable of doing so much. And you would assume that when you pick up that, it's pretty much the size of a Vita's damn phone. But, you would assume that when you pick it up, that's the kind of experience you get. And then when they finally announce something like Borderlands 2, or what was that, Killzone Mercenaries or stuff like that, you pick it up and all you feel from that attempted core experience is that it's limited in comparison to the core experience. So it doesn't really succeed on that front. And at the same time, when it comes to like this, I love the Mark Cerny tag, so I'm going to keep using it, joy of play. When it comes to gameplay and how games are developed and how Nintendo does that.
Yeah.
Developers, that is Nintendo's charm. And I think that comes out more in the 3DS. And I think that is why the Nintendo handheld, compared to its core experience at home, is performing way better. Because that's where Nintendo is strong. With their first parties, it's just...
It comes off as more as a casual game.
Yeah, it's kind of like you pick up a Nintendo and there's this nostalgic feeling like this is what I remember gaming to be, and you pick it up and it's okay if it's on that small screen. But once you take that nostalgic feeling and you put it on your big screen, you're like, this is not enough.
I think that might be another reason too, though. Like BioShock, God, another one of my favorite games. But I just can't feasibly think of myself. Almost, this was brought up last time, having it on a phone. I do not physically see myself wanting to sit down and play how many hour game is that? 6 to 8 to 10 hour game on a handheld screen. I'd rather have it on my big screen with a controller in my hand and being able to engulf myself into it.
Right.
While Nintendo games, in my opinion, are more casual based games. I think that might be another reason why the 3DS. You can hop on a train, play it for 30 minutes, an hour, shut it off. No real worry of where am I at? How far do I need to get? And really,
well, the Vita has that
but
too.
You can't really, other than Pokemon,
you just press the button and then when you turn it on, you're right where you left off.
Well, it means as far as.
But I just don't want to engulf myself into a game on a handheld compared to, because even Pokemon, even though that's one of its biggest factors, but it's more, to me, more of a grind fest than anything else.
Yeah.
But you can't really engulf yourself into that because it's grinding. While games for the Vita and anything that's a real home seller, I think, and that's a reason why the 360, PS4, what have you, sold much better, is because you have games that you can engulf yourself in and be able to do it at the comfort of your own home instead of doing it while you're walking, while you're driving, while you're riding. Yeah, that's why I think another reason why the Wii has had the problems, because they're the first party games and Mario's always sold well for them and Zelda, but they're still very casual games to me. Yeah, because I can pick it up, play it for a bit, and drop it, and I'm okay. It doesn't really bother me as much.
All right. Well, we're okay. So it's the thing is there's a market, and the fidelity wasn't as far as they could push it, and it sounds like that fidelity isn't necessarily important for it to be successful. It's and we agree that a single service, single console, not sustainable, and that there will be some competition regardless, no matter how
well, doesn't that mean if we're saying that no matter what there's going to be competition
from somewhere, there's going to be market pressures from somewhere, and eventually somebody's going to try to carve out a piece of whatever empire there is.
All right. So since we're approaching the hour, let's do that final around the table question.
Yeah.
So we'll go around the table, and the question is, one console future, can it happen? And if it does, how long do you think it will last? And of course, whether you think it'll be good or bad for the games industry.
Okay, that's a big little tail end there.
It is. Well, I mean, I'm just saying, when you make your response, make it positive or negative.
Don't analyze all of the factors. Just come down black or white. Okay.
Do you see it as a positive future? And if you do, how long will it last?
Based on the current trajectory, I don't see it becoming a single console future. And if it did, it would be because the industry was so splintered that nobody would be able to, or would be sure of what they were getting when they bought a game. They couldn't be sure of, either quality like it was in the 80s, or whether it would work with their hardware, that it would just get so splintered that, you'd want to play, but you wouldn't really know how. So one console future could happen as a result of that, and it would be great for the games industry, but it would only last in that context, it would only last for a generation, 5 years. 5 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if that. I mean, because the technology in other sectors will be advancing to the point where, and the whole thing we haven't mentioned is the propensity for these people with these great ideas to think of things that we didn't even know we wanted.
Jason?
I don't think if there's ever a single point where it's only one console, I think it'd be very short-lived. Just, like how, even with Nintendo came out, saved the video game industry, but almost how long after that was when Sega came out? Mm-hmm. I think there will always be competition, because there's always going to be some company or something I can do this. I can do it better than they can. And then I will launch a competition, which is the best for innovation is competition.
Yeah.
So I don't think there will ever be, other than maybe a year or two, where it will be just a single console, because something will happen to cause some form of competition. That's my opinion, but I honestly hope it never does become one single entity, because I'd rather have diversity for my choices. And kind of like what Brian said, there's always going to be polarization. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be more action-based consoles, kind of like how the 360 was. And there's going to be more that rather have thought-progressing type games. And that's what I would rather have, to be able to, for other developers to be able to think more and also be original. And I think that's where we're staled at right now. There's not a lot of original content. Yep. And that's why we need competition. Because if there's only one console, there's not going to be a lot of original ideas coming out of that. It's just going to be you can look at Activision, Call of Duty 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3 billion. It's the same game over and over again.
Yeah. What do you think?
I don't think that we can ever quite get to the point where there's just one console. Because what I was thinking too is when Netflix came out, the streaming service, it was such a huge thing, and then you got Hulu, and then you had Amazon Prime, and it was kind of one of those things too of Netflix, when they raised their prices, that upset so many people they just jump ship to something else. And I think even the consoles, if it comes down to a streaming service, which I don't know that it will ever come to that point, because me and Jason are like this, where we don't even like having just the straight download games. We always like having something to sit on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And I think the console will feel the same way. I think our entertainment center would feel empty if there wasn't something sitting there that you had to turn on. And,
something tangible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if it did come down to a streaming service, I think that somebody would quickly jump on to have a similar streaming service, to where they know that, people are going to get upset over that, whether it's the price, whether it's lack of games, and then they'll jump ship to something else. Because that's what everybody does. Same thing with, I used the example of cable companies before. If you do have an area that has two cable companies competing, when they get upset, they're just going to jump ship to something else. Yep. Which is why I don't think, in this day and age, it could come down to just being just one console. There will be an option to some, like a lot of people are getting upset with consoles, so they're jumping ship to Steam and stuff like that too. Yep. That's why I don't, and if it did ever come to that, I don't think that it would last long, because, like I said, people would get upset, they'd jump ship, they'd stop paying for the streaming service, they'd sell their console, whatever it comes down to at that point, and then just have nothing probably if they got to that point.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I think it's definitely a possibility. Are you falling in love, Brian? What's going on?
You're so dreamy. I just love to hear you talk.
You know, you didn't seem that way when you guys were freaking attacking me, one with a hammer and one with ice water. But
I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah, whatever. I think it's viable that we would have a one console future at one point. I don't think it would be at the level that it is now. I don't think it would be like, oh, PlayStation 5 comes out and it's the only console. I think, like I said before, what I believe we would probably be headed towards if a one console future would happen is that one console would probably be a streaming service. Because I do see that that's the direction they're going in now.
Well, I still argue that because, like, what companies are doing now, releasing these huge limited edition box sets that we are still buying. Mm-hmm. And that is why they are continuing to do that. And I can't remember what article it was, I think that we read a couple months ago that was talking about how, you know, they're arguing that direct download and things like that are a bigger thing, but they're saying just as many or more are still wanting to buy the disc.
Right. And what I was getting at was not that they were going to eliminate the disc. What I was going to say is that the streaming service will probably, what I see is happening is that would be the one console future where all of the previous games, all of the current conventional games at whatever time this would happen, where the internet and the technology catches up, where they could stream and deal with that input lag. Yeah. That once we get to that point, I feel like streaming will be the conventional video game, and that's where you're going to get your library, and that will be, at that time, what will be considered today the casual game. Even though it will seem like a AAA experience at the time for a conventional sit down on the couch and play a game with a controller, but I think technology will move into something way more interactive. I think the fact that VR peripherals are being developed now is a good example of that, and I think that's going to be a future platform. So I think the more interactive games, I think that's where we're going to see the competition, and I think for the conventional games, I could see that becoming the one console future, where you sit down with a controller and just play. And then I see the VR being that competition. I don't see where that's heading. I do see Morpheus, and I see Oculus Rift, of course, you know, and I see that going on now. Yeah. I don't know how that's going to move forward. Oculus Rift requires a PC. Morpheus requires the PS4. Yep. I mean, right now, I really can't tell how that's going to affect the market, what's going to happen. But that's the only way I see it happening. If we did...
see it in 3D. That's the
yeah. If we did, and, you know, if we didn't talk about, like, what if or, you know, where it would go, we just talked about the one console future as it is today. Yeah. It would be great. It would be great for gamers. I think it would be horrible for the games industry in terms of longevity. We're already worried, and you could see it all over the industry that people are worried about Nintendo's performance this generation because they're at that entry point, and it is important to introduce new people to gaming, and that is their sector. That's where they are, and I think that if it weren't for Xbox 360 last generation, we wouldn't have the PS4 this generation. And if it weren't for the PS2, we wouldn't see a successful Xbox 360. And I think that's what's... In terms of longevity, when you look at the single generations, I can see that 360 was far more successful than the PS3. I could see that PS2 was far more successful than the GameCube. I can see that...
That's wow.
I mean, it was.
It was like punching a horse in the face.
I mean, it was.
Well, technically, wasn't the PS2 more successful than
anything?
Pretty much everything.
Yeah, pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And that was the momentum that they built from, you know, PS1 and threw in that backwards compatibility and that tagline that they already launched with this great big library. Yeah. But regardless, I think that if you look at it in the individual generations, you see one winner. But if you look at it overall, you could see who created the next winner. And I think that's what the games industry needs in order to survive. And that's why we started with me being worried that I love my PlayStation 4. I don't care for an Xbox One right now. But PS4 outselling Xbox One 3-1, that either means a very bright Xbox 2, or if they want to keep going backwards, Xbox Zero, you know, I think that means the next generation for Microsoft will be that much more amazing because they'll fight back, and we'll see what Sony does. But yeah, I think one console future cannot work with any longevity beyond, like you said before, beyond maybe 5 years, maybe one life cycle. But I think that'll put a really big dent on the games industry. But yeah, on that note, we'd love to see what you guys think. We haven't come to terms, really. We kind of argued our positions really strongly. So I'd really like to hear, we'd all like to hear what you guys think. Definitely use the comment space below. And one console future. Positive, negative for the games industry. Do you think it's viable? Whatever your opinions, we'd love to hear them, and we'd love to engage with you in the comment space. So definitely let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Later, guys.
Thank you, guys.